way back when I was talking about how bad a certain section of the Underdark in Critical Role was. I kind of drew out a diagram. I drew out a map where I used my own personal map-making notation and I guess you could call it analysis notation. And I had several people ask me about it afterwards, say that they thought it was interesting. And so I thought that I would make a full video on it. I'm not going to show every little bit and bob, just kind of the basics, the core of it, as well as the core of how I use it. So with that, I will open up one of the maps, but I won't even talk about the map yet. I'm just going to show you guys the different types of nodes. And actually, this is a bad one for it. So we're going to open up Forge of Fury. But like I said, I'm not going to actually talk about the map itself yet. We're just going to talk about these different colors. So there are 4 types of nodes. Well, to be more clear, there are nodes and there are paths. Everything is a node or a path. That is it. Okay? So there are going to be 4 main node types. There are going to be these, the black node types. These are nothing special. They can be considered your default or your basic node, where they don't have anything interesting, there's no fighting, it's just a room. Now there are obstacles, and obstacles are both, they can be a lot of things. They are basically something that you have to deal with before you can move on and move past. Next is treasure. Treasure is just anything that is generally valuable. Normally it has a gold amount attached to it, but it could also be things like a land deed, maybe a set of forged papers, a key. There's a lot of things that could be classified as treasure. It is something that is not necessarily interesting. Maybe it doesn't progress the plot in any way, but it is valuable somehow. Next is, the last one, an interesting node. An interesting node is anything that progresses any plot, or it is a specific thing that builds out the theme. So those are all the node types. Next are the edge or path types. If you're a graph theory nerd, you know, it's vertices and edges, but I'm going to be calling them nodes and paths. So a black path is just like a black node. It's not anything interesting. There's no obstacle to overcome. It is just a blank hallway. And these are important. I don't want to make this seem like the black nodes or the black paths aren't needed. You need to have empty hallways and empty rooms to give your players a breather. Not everything can be interesting or challenging or some sort of obstacle. So you need these black paths. Next are the red paths, which are obstacle paths. They work exactly the same, as obstacle nodes. The general difference is that this would be considered an obstacle that prevents you from getting from one area to another. This would be considered an obstacle that prevents you from progressing through an area. And this is vague for a reason, all right? This has a lot of area for ambiguity, for interpretation. This is where I talked about it's a little bit, but somewhere between art and science. There's some wiggle room for personal style to come out. Next will be a challenging path. And this is something that I've talked about in the CR watch-throughs before that I think is not very often talked about when people do talk about map design, but that it is an incredibly important part of a good map. A challenging path is something that affects the people along the entire length of the path and can be mitigated, but cannot necessarily be overcome in the same way that you might overcome a red obstacle. Right? A red obstacle is maybe there's a group of goblins in this area, and when you defeat the goblins, that area is no longer red. It has transitioned into being black, or maybe blue or yellow. But a challenging path is typically challenging no matter what. There's typically no real way that you can prevent the challenge without substantially modifying the terrain or the map itself. A really good example of this is actually later in Forge of Fury. These purple paths represent a fast-flowing stream. A fast-flowing stream is kind of impossible to explicitly overcome. You can get past it, but the stream will still be there if you were to double back, as opposed to a group of goblins where when you overcome the goblins, when you either make a deal with them or kill them, knock them out, whatever, you're probably not going to have to deal with that on the way back if you were to backtrack. So that's kind of the definitional thing about challenging paths. And the very last one is a shortcut, which this map only has 2 of them, but a shortcut is something very specific. And it is really important to identify, right? There are some other things that maybe you could like subclassify within these paths, and it might seem a bit superfluous to strictly define what a shortcut is, but I promise you it is very important. A shortcut is a path that requires some sort of obstacle, often something that requires a bit more of a specific skill set to overcome, to be dealt with before it becomes accessible, which then bypasses other obstacles or challenging paths. So, for this example, for this one, this is behind a secret door in Area 40, and you have to bypass the obstacle at 39 to get to it. If you do take this shortcut, you bypass both of these challenging paths that go from 38 to 38A and from 38 to 50, right? This shortcut bypasses all of that, which is really nice. And you will see later on, once I start getting into the specific examples, shortcuts can really set the tone of a map, significantly more than you might think. They are perhaps one of the most tonally significant parts of a map. And that's why I do strictly define them and why they get their own color and they get special attention within my maps. Understanding what is or is not a shortcut is vital to understanding how your players will progress through the map, and not only that, how their progression will feel. If they take a shortcut that you don't realize is a shortcut, you might all of a sudden encounter them feeling or acting kind of strangely, and you won't know why. So, that's it. Those are it. There are 4 node types, there are 4 edge types. Everything in a map can be boiled down to one of those 4 types. Obviously, that is abstracting a lot out of it. And I said at the beginning that this is meant to be an abstraction. You are meant to have to make hard decisions when you use this notation, because ultimately that will force you to think about how you really consider this node. So the first one that we'll look at is the death house. So the first thing that I will point out, and I'll kind of run you through the general path of death house. You start at the beginning. You can kind of explore this whole first floor. There are absolutely no obstacles of any kind. No traps, no fights, absolutely nothing on the first floor. Then, this is the one thing I forgot to mention. If there's a dotted line, that just means that there's an elevation change. This is not necessary at all to the notation, but I find it helpful to categorize things in my head and to really understand what's going on when I look at some things in the easier layout. So yeah, dotted lines just indicate a substantial elevation change. Next, I will generally point out, this is the entire second floor. So 6 through 10. And again, we have really only emptiness and interesting things. And I'll be honest, I'm still stretching for interesting. I'm trying to make this just not all blacks. And if I were running Death House, I would have this on my second monitor, or I'd have it overlaid over the map to remind myself to try and make those areas as interesting as possible, because that's their primary purpose. Otherwise, you have nothing here. All you have is interesting, and an obstacle, and then more interesting. Then we have floor 3, and you can already see, there's something going on. We've now transitioned from kind of nothing to total interesting zone. There are 5 interesting nodes all connected. And then we get to obstacle zone. Bum, bum, bum. Like, you want to more delicately pace these things. You want to kind of spread them throughout. And you do have to think about that. Yes, clearly they did not anticipate them going from 5 to 2 to 6 to 8 to 9. Right? And if I look at it on here, you'll especially see that. They do not envision you going from 5 to 6, 8, 9. That's not the path that they have envisioned. But that is very much something your players could do. One of the things that we all love about TTRPGs is the way in which our players can surprise us. So you have to be always thinking about not necessarily the worst case scenario, but the most unexpected case. And if they did choose to go from 5 to 2 to 6 to 8 to 9, they would be absolutely overwhelmed. And then if they went from 11 to 14 all the way back to 15, that would be an absolute slog with absolutely no break. So this really tight clustering of the same color of nodes can be absolutely murderous to your pace. Next, I want to talk about bottlenecks, because we've come to one. You can see that this top area is an absolute bottleneck. There is legitimately no way to progress through Death House if you do not go through number 11. That is a bottleneck, definitionally. So we have to really think about our bottlenecks really carefully. If it is an area that we are forcing our players through, we need to consider all of the ways that they might get there and what that could mean for the pacing. As well as we need to treat our bottlenecks with reverence. This should be an important area. If there is an obstacle here, which I think it's debatable if there even should be, if I'm totally honest, I would generally put interesting things at my bottleneck to inform you of what you're going to get in the next area. And you can put obstacle paths before or after your interesting element, but I would try to put interesting elements at my bottleneck. But regardless, even if you don't do that, you have to keep in mind that this place is important. You have to think about how they're going to come in. Now, them coming into this, actually not too bad. They get something interesting and then they go straight into an obstacle. Not bad. Same thing, they get a treasure, go into an obstacle. Not terrible. But when they come out, oh, terrible. So they've just gone through this obstacle and they are met with obstacle, obstacle, obstacle. If they go through here, they are met with another obstacle. Ugh, this is what people talk about when they talk about a slog, when they talk about having to just grind through a dungeon. You do not want this many reds in such tight proximity, especially if it is on a bottleneck. Once we get into 18 and 21 is where things start getting, let's call it interesting. 21 requires overcoming the obstacles in either 9 or 20 to overcome. These obstacles are not super obvious, and this is one of the ways where the map abstraction notation can somewhat fall short. There's no indicator of what the obstacle is or how difficult it might be to overcome. And so when you're first looking at this, you might think that that's okay. I would always encourage to have an obstacle not be story locked, right? Like the obstacle here, it literally says like, this is a blank wall unless they have one of these two things. There is absolutely no guidance for any other way to deal with it in the moment. Obstacles should always be able to be dealt with right then and there. Now, other things can make them easier to deal with. Maybe this is a DC 20 perception check. And if you overcome the 9 or the 20, then it goes down to a 5. Or there's no perception check required at all. That's great. This is a very bad example of a bottleneck, something that has no way past without other options, other artifacts, other knowledge. Now, we get to what I like to call a fan structure. A fan structure is one room that has multiple branching rooms off of it. And I'll show you what this looks like on the actual map so that you kind of understand. So this is 22. This is 23, A, B, C, D, E, F. Right? They are given distinct room numbers, and they are distinct rooms. So you do have to make nodes for them. You have to consider them as dots. Now, fan structures are interesting. They can be a really easy way to really centralize a section of your dungeon. They can be used to do a lot of things all at once, and I think that that's what they're best at. This should have a combination of all of the different node types. There should be an empty room. There should be some interesting rooms. There should be an obstacle room. Either a room that's trapped or has an enemy in it. There should be risk and tension, because otherwise you risk the ability of going between these all very quick becoming tedious. Right? Because that's both the advantage and the risk of the fan structure, is that it is so quick and simple to go between all of these rooms. If they're all blue, if they're all interesting, you are going to absolutely overwhelm people. They will get bored, no matter how interesting everything is, and you will get tired of talking as a DM. If they are all obstacles, this is absolutely terrible. This isn't even a slog at that point. It's overwhelming and a slog and a grind. You would never want all of these to be red. If all of them are black, you're just totally wasting everyone's time. And if all of them are treasure, well, that can be bad in a different way. This gets into being able to see how invested your players will be in this map. If you see this sort of thing where they're going treasure, 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 you are firmly embedding your players in their character sheets and not in their characters. If I had to redo this right now, get rid of all of these rooms, put all of this treasure in a single treasure chest, and be done with it. You simply don't want the same node type to be everything on a fan structure. It will get tedious in some way. Now, it could get tedious in a lot of ways, but there will be some way in which it's tedious. Last thing I want to talk about with Death House are what I would call a branching path. This right here, this 22 to 26, right? There are two ways to get from 22 to 26. There's either going from 22 to 27 to 26 or going the southern way, 24, 25, 26. This is bad. This branching path is really subtly bad because if this 25 just weren't there, right? If we just delete all of that and make this like this, suddenly this is a loop that players can just play with, right? They know very quickly exactly what is going on. They go from 22 to 24 to 26, and they look back and they recognize 27. Like, okay, that was fast. I know what's happening. This is a loop that we can use as a tool, right? Very, very small. But adding just a single node to it can chuck the players out of that mindset. Suddenly, it's like, well, why was this 24 there in the first place? It's very similar to this 16, 19, and then, this phantom third one situation. The moment you add in a third node here, it becomes weird. It starts feeling odd. And they start to wonder, well, what was the purpose of that? Now, the purpose in this case was that there's all of this treasure in this room. And so that's supposed to be the purpose of 25, but they don't have to check these rooms. In fact, these rooms are not narrated to be especially poppin' or luxurious. There's a really good chance that they just wouldn't check these rooms and they would just move on. Now, those of you that know Death House, that know what area this is, or doing your homework on your side, know that I'm talking about this 22, 24, 25, 26, and the opposite way, 22, 27, 26. And you might say, well, 25 has this well, and this well is actually very useful for this 29 fight down here. And you're totally right. But that's what you have to think about. If you just delete this path, suddenly everything is justified. Suddenly this very odd configuration makes sense within the wider context. There's no way to skip this 29, and the 29 can spill out across all of these nodes. Having these blank nodes here to just have the combat spill into is totally okay. And that's why, again, as I said at the beginning, this is somewhere between art and science. You do have to have the context of what the map is to understand certain configurations. But if you say that, if you're looking through here and you say, okay, well, 24 and 25 are configured this way to help with the 29 fight, well, what if they don't do the 29 fight? That's why you have to not have this path right here, because they don't have to do the 29 fight at all. They could get into 22, go around here, overcome this obstacle right here, this 26, and go straight into the basement. They don't have to do 29 at all. And then this has lost all of its meaning. This has lost all of its purpose, and they will just be like, well, that was kind of weird. That part of the dungeon felt kind of odd. Why was there a random well there? That doesn't really make any sense. And you will have a bad feeling, a bad taste in the player's mouth. Because it's not even like it's an intriguing, like, ooh, why was that there? It's just weird. So, this is a really great example of something that works in theory, but only if your players go a specific path that is actually not the fastest path at all. Now, obviously, your players won't know what the fastest path is, but it really bears considering. The other thing that I want to examine here is the sheer number of obstacles here. If you have ever seen someone talk about Death House, they normally will say something to the effect of the front of the house feels empty, the back of the house feels grindy and super deadly. And just look at this layout. It's super clear why. There are more than half of the obstacles within like a 4-node radius of the goal, and the start has more black than anything else. Right? So this is what they're talking about. When people say that Death House feels empty at the start and deadly at the end, you can just see that in this notation. It's actually very clear when you look at the distributions. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about with Death House, very, very last thing, I think I already said that, but actual last thing, is this shortcut. And I don't need to talk about this for a long time. This is a Skyrim shortcut. Any shortcut that is one way like this, and by the way, I hate using these arrows. I use these arrows very sparingly to represent one-way paths that cannot be traversed the opposite direction. I don't really believe in them, at least when I'm making my own maps. I think that they are very rarely a useful thing to put into your maps. Sometimes they are necessary, and Forge of Fury actually has a few that I do think are okay. I do think are legitimate. This one is not. This one is just a trap door that you explicitly cannot discover from this side. It won't let you, because it skips the entire map. Obviously, they won't let you. So then at the very end, the point is supposed to be that if you bypass, or if you get through these obstacles up here, then you get this nice quick exit that just bypasses the entire house. And that sucks. Especially because if they did take the fastest path down, there's no reason for them to think that this shortcut would be over here. And so there's kind of one of two situations. Either a reasonable party has to trudge back through everything that they've already done, and if that's your intended path, and you want to have the house be interesting on the way out, which does seem to be the intention with Death House, then why create this shortcut, right? If that's the intended path, if you want them to trudge back through, just don't have there be a shortcut here. Alternatively, if you don't want them to trudge through the rest of the house, you need to make, number one, the shortcut more obvious. But also, you should have the shortcut be engaging. It should not just be obstacle, obstacle, whoop, you're done. That feels terrible. You want it to not just be a climax and then a peter out. You want interesting things on the way out. After you've accomplished your goal, you still want to be delivering interesting clues about the dungeon and the further plot that will happen after the dungeon. And this shortcut in particular just totally wrecks that. But in general, I would call this a Skyrim shortcut, something that just takes you from the end back to the beginning. And Skyrim shortcuts, in general, are really terrible for pacing your dungeon in a realistic manner. Next, we'll move on to Forge of Fury. And this actually shows how I go about generally analyzing maps. When I was doing Death House, I wasn't using this tool at the time, so it doesn't have my actual initial analysis on here. But normally what I do is I paste all of the pictures of the map into the tool, I draw all of the nodes on top of it, I paste the nodes out separately, and then I develop the easy layout or whatever other layouts I would like. Very first thing I want to bring your attention to is the fan structure. Very similar to the Death House over here, but these fan structures actually are not nearly as bad. This one in particular, not terrible. I would maybe put like a yellow, like a treasure on 23B, but overall, not a bad fan structure. This one is terrible. These are just empty room on empty room, and none of them add to anything. There is no reason to continue looking through these rooms. These room 44s. And I'll show you what it looks like on the actual map. There's this central area that is then connected to all of these rooms. Now, this fight can spill into these rooms, but again, there's just nothing interesting. Move some of this interesting stuff into there. Move this shrine treasure into one of the 44s. I mean, and honestly, get rid of some of them. Merge some of these to reduce the number of blacks and the number of, basically the amount of wasted time that you'll have to go through in order to sufficiently explore all of them. So, I mean, but you can automatically see that. If you look at the easier to comprehend layout, it looks terrible, just visually. And that's, again, one of the benefits of the notation is that it immediately looks terrible. Beyond that, there's actually a lot that we can be really happy about with this map. First of all is the ratio and the diversity of node colors as we go through. We have blue, then red, then a red path, then black, then a purple path, red, yellow, red path, blue. I mean, we're just switching through the whole gamut of colors on this first pass through. And I do also like that you can very easily see that this is kind of a high risk, high reward area. There's a large volume of yellows and a large volume of reds, with a nice smattering of blues added in to make sure that it doesn't get boring. This is a really interesting area, especially for a more wargamey type party that wants to overcome challenges and get treasure and get rewarded. Maybe they're not as narratively driven. This is a fantastic map and starting point for that type of party. Now, if your party is more narratively driven, they might find this a bit slow or dull, and that's why you have to know your party when you're analyzing these maps. The other thing that I really want to highlight here is this little diamond, and I'll show you what it looks like on the actual map, because it has the same structure. Now, if you ever played through Forge of Fury, you might know that there are no walls or doors there are no doors or paths between the outside of the dwarf door and 4 and 4A. 4 and 4A are archer arrow slits that rain arrows down on you from the interior if you go to outside the dwarf door. They are specific hazards. However, this is something important, and this is something with my own personal stylization of this abstraction notation, is I have had so many players and parties just blow their way through walls or teleport through grates, teleport through barred doors that have a slight vision hole through them. You have to think about if there is anything that can pass between these two areas, that's a path. If an arrow can pass through it, so can a misty step. Okay? So this goes from being, nothing to just being a challenging path. A player with the right resources can 100% get from 2 to 4. No question. So, that's a really important thing to consider when considering the rest of the notation. Beyond that, I want to draw your attention to a bottleneck and compare it to the Death House bottlenecks. I really, really like this one. We have 3 separate reds all funneling into a single interesting node that is the bottleneck. That's great. It means that they are being challenged no matter what. They are going through a combat. They have really, that they have gotten through the challenge, and now they are being immediately rewarded with some sort of clue. It also means that you can really construct this interesting node to deliver, say, a required piece of information that maybe you can't do on a 6. Like, you don't want to put a required piece of information on 6 because they don't have to go there. But if you make this number 10 the bottleneck, they have to go there. They will have just overcome a challenge, and you can easily reward them with a piece of crucial, critical information. There's also lots of yellow around it to further that rewarding feeling, right? You've gone through the challenges. Here's your reward, both monetarily and narratively. This is a great bottleneck because it all funnels them in to that structure right there. Then we have a breather. We have a reset. So they go through all of this really, kind of intense final bit to this area, and then they get a breather before they go into anything else. They get a black. This is a fantastic bottleneck setup where they have to go through this, and you are presenting them with nice closure to the area they just left and a breather area to get prepared for the next area. Fantastic bottleneck setup. Now, the other thing I want to talk about here are junctions. So I called this the tunnel junction. It doesn't have a number. It's clearly not explicitly called out by the book. So what am I talking about? Well, I'm talking about this right here. This junction that goes to this room, and 8. Now, there are a couple of ways to interpret this. You can either just say that 5 is connected to both 8 and the secret passage, and vice versa, that 8 is connected to the secret passage as well as 5. And it's already connected to 5 over here, so it'd be double connected to 5. Or you can have this right here. Now, I just want to draw your attention to this junction type structure. I'm not going to talk about it too much more because Gnomon Guard and Emberhold both have really clear examples of why you might want to use junctions. But just keep it in the back of your head for now, that sometimes we will abstract areas that are not explicitly nodes, and we will make them a node. Next, I want to look at this little structure right here. This 19, 18 northwest, 18 southwest, all of this. Now, you might think, I've talked about the fan structures, and I've talked about that I don't like it when the fan structures have absolutely nothing but the same color all around them. And I stick to that. When I first was looking at this, and this is a really great example of why this abstraction notation works. When I first read this in the Forge of Fury book, I thought that this area was fine. And then I looked at it, and it kind of tipped my spidey senses off. I was like, well, actually, that's kind of shitty. And I looked and I was like, that doesn't look good. I mean, yeah, there's a treasure over here, but it's a lot of red on the way and all around it. Is that treasure worth it? That better be a crazy treasure. And it got me to go back and look. This is the troglodyte area. This is the troglodyte nest. I can tell you right now, that 19 ain't worth it. And if your players trudge through this, if they go through here and they go through here and they encounter all of this red, all of this resistance, this better be very interesting. Now, that seems a little bit odd, right? That I'm being so harsh on this area, but it has to do with the speed at which you go through this. These reds are dispersed one after the other, and they have optional things to discover along the way. This is red challenge. Oh, whoops. This is red challenging. Red, 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 red. Then yellow. The notation maybe doesn't do it justice, but this central area could maybe be classified as red as well. I chose not to, because I would say that by default it's not, but someone else could classify it as red, as some of these things will come out and attack you in the central area if you're too loud. In my notation and in my analysis of this map, I chose to make this edge red instead, kind of symbolizing that need for stealth, because if you do stealth, then this central area has no real risk factors within it. It's only these ones that have risk factors, and that is only if you don't stealth. I've already talked about the dungeon types and feels, but I think that this is a really good example of those types of feels. I also think that just like this bottleneck, the next bottleneck is very nice to compare to Death House and show how much better it is. This 24 right here is a door. It is the door, 27 is a door. but you have to go through 24 to get to 27. So 27 is a door that has a key. The key is down here in 34. There, you have to go all the way down here to get it. The key allows you instantly through 27, but you can still get through 27 even if you don't have the key. You can lockpick it, and the door has stats. It has an AC, it has health. It is able to be overcome, albeit it's very difficult to overcome if you don't have the key, but it's at least able to be overcome, as opposed to the Death House's 21 up here, where there's absolutely no way to overcome it. This is how you do this type of bottleneck. It's very okay to have a bottleneck that heavily encourages you to go and look in another segment of the dungeon. The other thing about it is that it is a door. It is something that explicitly implies the existence of a key, as opposed to this, which is a blank wall, unless you have already found 19 or 20. There's absolutely no appearance that there's even an obstacle here in the first place. So really, when you're looking between these two maps, it gives such an incredible example of how you can segment these areas, right? You have the mountain door, you have the Glitterhame, you have the you have the foundry. And in Death House, you have first floor. Oh goodness, I didn't lock it. You have first floor, second floor, third floor, attic, basement. Right? They both have these very explicitly segmented areas that have bottlenecks between them. But oh my goodness, the Forge of Fury is so much better at it. So much better. And it's pretty obvious. It's obvious on this map notation, and it's not obvious on this map notation. And I do want to admit that. I want to make that clear. The map notation doesn't say that this 27 is better than this 21. That is not what the map abstraction does. The map abstraction helps you identify those bottlenecks. You look at this and you're like, ooh, I got to make sure that this area is good. They have to go through this. I need to really consider this. And then you go back and consider it, and it sucks. Whereas Forge of Fury, you go and look at this 27, and you go, oh, actually, that's really good. I like that as a bottleneck, right? That is the point of the abstraction notation. It is not to solve your map for you. It is to draw your attention to specific areas and things that may or may not be wrong with them. I almost totally missed it. We got to talk about unnecessary areas, and we got to talk about shortcuts again. I almost forgot. This area is terrible. I don't actually hate it from I hate this fan structure, but beyond the fan structure, it's not too bad. The problem is it can be so easily bypassed. And when you think about how easily something can be bypassed, you have to consider if that will feel all right to your players. Sometimes it will, sometimes it won't. Now, will it or won't it is going to be heavily influenced by these little green boys. These are shortcuts. Now, these shortcuts are secret doors. They are secret doors that go... I don't know why this is so far over. I don't know why that was the case. They are secret doors that go from a room that is... it has a chief in it. It's a very interesting encounter. And they are blocked by I believe, an investigation check to find, and then I believe also a lockpick check to actually open. But it means that you can very easily go from here. The module, as it presents it to you, would have you think that these two challenging paths are not there. That's horseshit. They absolutely are there. This is a pit. A pit is perhaps one of the easiest obstacles to overcome in all of D&D, to the point that I don't even consider it an obstacle, even from level 1. I always consider pits to be challenging paths at worst, unless they have something at the bottom of them like spikes, right, where it would still matter if you fell down them. And I have this opinion because of feather falling. Feather falling is an extremely accessible spell, both in potion and in class form in terms of accessibility, and makes this pit a non-issue. If you want to go down there, you just can. Now, there is maybe some discussion around would you even know you have to go down there, and that discussion is immediately bypassed by the fact that the game or the module explicitly narrates how you can see this ladder if you look around the corner on this ledge. So you know that you need to go down there. So, that could mean that we're actually okay. That could mean, okay, we have some challenging paths. I also considered, I'll go back up. I also considered ledge to ledge as a challenging path, because while this is an adventure for third level parties can still have the jump spell, and they can still do some clever things like shooting a crossbow across to make a little bit of a tightrope. So there are certainly ways to get from this ledge to this ledge over here. Just, again, a challenging path. A path that is risky, that has danger involved the entire way across, kind of no matter what you do. But it is a path nonetheless. So there are two paths here. Now, you could say, okay, this shortcut is actually okay because it goes from here. You have to go past an obstacle. You have to find it, which does imply that it's a shortcut, and the game presents it, or I keep saying game, and the book portrays it as such. It portrays it as a secret behind-the-wall passage, so it's very clearly presented as a shortcut. And it bypasses a dangerous area. It gets you to this 38, and it makes it to where you don't have to take the challenging path. That's actually a fantastic example of a shortcut. And it still would be if there wasn't this entire area up here. And I'm going to really simplify this in order to, I think, more accurately explain it. There are essentially 3 paths here. Okay? 3 paths that all go to the same place, right? They all go to 50. This is the top. This is the middle. And this is the bottom. Okay. Now, this is fine. This sort of 3-pronged structure. Oh, and they all start at 36 or 35. Take your pick. We'll put it at 36. Right, so this is sort of a 3-pronged structure, and you can sort of abstract this pretty far into saying that, okay, the bottom is generally, it's challenging, it's risky, it's dangerous. The middle is generally a shortcut. It's actually much easier than the other 2, but it requires very specific skill checks to get through. And the top, what is the top? I mean, I'm looking at it, it doesn't really seem to easily classify as anything. It has the same number of obstacles as this does, as the bottom path does, and actually you still have to find the shortcut. If you don't find the shortcut in 46, this doesn't get you past at all. So actually what's going on here is that this top path is what we would call in the biz a waste of time. This means absolutely nothing. You still have to take the shortcut. If you do not take the shortcut, if you do not find the shortcut, you still have to take the bottom challenging path, which makes this top an extreme waste of time. Now, that might be different if these interesting nodes were maybe more interesting. I was being, I would say, pretty generous with the interestingness here, as they do reference parts of the plot, and they do provide interesting and intriguing interactions, but all in all, they do not progress anything that happens afterward, and they don't really comment that much on anything that came before. This 46 especially, I was being very generous on. And this 49 is a totally unrelated subplot about a succubus that moved in after everyone was already dead. It's certainly interesting. It's an interesting little side plot, but it has nothing to do with, frankly, anything. When you combine it with this terrible fan structure that just appears built to waste time, this entire top area is just a massive time waster. Right? If you delete this, it actually becomes a lot more clear what's going on here. Right? It becomes a lot more clear, like, what's happening. So if you see this sort of structure, it needs to provide something unique. I mean, honestly, in general, I wouldn't even do it. What I would do is make this top path what I would call a long path. So a long path is typically a path with several obstacles around it that, while they take much longer, they are much more straightforward. So really what I would do here, if I had to modify this, it's actually very simple. Number one, I would fix the fan structure, but that's neither here nor there. What I would do first is I would turn this 46 into another red. Or maybe I would move the succubus out of 49 and put her into 46, and then make this 49 a red. We're trying to make this a little bit more challenging. However, in 46, we are going to deliver a very obvious clue that this is the way down to the dragon. By the way, there's a dragon down here. That's number 52. Doesn't really matter. But at 46, we're going to deliver like a, hey, dragon this way sign. And we are going to present another obstacle. So this path is going to have double the amount of obstacles of the other path, but it's going to be very straightforward. You're not going to have to do an extreme amount of thinking. Your players will not have to discover things. They will not have to pass perception checks. They will just have to expend resources, and they will get there. And then the last thing we do is we offer a path from 49A to 50, an easy path, or maybe a red path. I mean, it just has to be a path that is obvious. And this structure you could call just your default dungeon structure. Just do this over and over and over, and you will have at least a solid basis for a dungeon. You have entrance, you have a long but very obvious path that just requires spending some resources. You have a shortcut path that, while less resource intensive, maybe requires more specific resources to be utilized. And then you have a risky, challenging path that maybe requires the same number of resources. It also requires less than the middle one, but there is distinct risk if your resources fail you or if you get bad rolls. This could be the most generic setup that you could ever create. And it's very easy. This is so close to doing it. It just fails right here, and this isn't quite hard enough. Finally, what we've all been waiting for. It's the Ember Hold. And I told you, you would think, Megaphone Man, Jack, what are you talking about? This is ridiculous. Well, I said it during the video. I said, oh my god, all of these rooms are connected. They are completely independent of each other. That's a nightmare. That's a nightmare to run. What the fuck is that is right, Robin Banks. It's terrible. Now, obviously, I am being purposely inflammatory here, right? It is very clearly not this confusing to run through. So, let's do some work to abstract it. Let's add some junctions. Now, I had to add, in order to make this map palatable, I had to add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 junctions in order to make this map somewhat palatable. That's bad. That's already bad. What is secondarily bad is the fastest path. The first thing that I will draw your attention to is that this is pretty empty. Now, I had to add in all these junctions, and you might say, okay, the original nodes, this is actually an okay distribution of interesting obstacle and black nodes. I think it's a little light. Maybe have like a treasure or two over here, but it's honestly not bad. But when you consider that in order to make all of these paths make sense, you have to add in all of these junctions, the interesting ratio goes way down and the amount of boring goes way up. Now, if you're having to abstract and rethink so much that kind of this is where you get to, you maybe know that there's something wrong with the fundamental layout here. The first thing that I would recommend if I were redoing this is I would just eliminate this right corridor over here. This has a bunch of connections, this junction, and it actually would allow you to merge these junctions pretty easily. I would also merge some of these rooms together, not necessarily in terms of like actually having them be the same room, just have them share a wall so that the paths are much more understandable and you don't have to use as many junctions. A good rule of thumb is that you will probably need a junction anytime more than 3 paths intersect. Right, so this is 1, 2, 3, need a junction. 1, 2, 3, need a junction. 1, 2, 3, need a junction, etc., etc. And you can even see that back on the Gnomon Guard. 1, 2, 3, need a junction. Now, the other thing that I'll show you, it is a really fast shortest path. I mean, if we're being really honest, where the players come in is right back here. They could go directly up the stairs. They would be on the top floor. They could defeat the things over here, and then they would be in the throne room, and they could do the throne room fight. It's that easy. They could just do it. Now, they weren't there to do the throne room fight, so they needed to get Kima. Kima is down here. So let's kind of think through this. Their objective was to get Kima. Kima is right next to the outside. Really, really close. So this is a boring-ass dungeon. If they go directly from the outside to Kima, oh my god, terrible. And you know what? That's exactly what they did. All they did was go directly from the outside and straight to Kima. And you know what Matt did? He made Kima make them stay in the dungeon because it was terrible otherwise. Kima made them stay in the dungeon, and Kima did not, direct them towards the throne room. Kima nudged them towards all of this, which is a buttload of wasted time. Absolutely nothing about this progresses them towards their goal. Absolutely nothing up here. The thing that progresses them towards their goal is going up these stairs, going to the throne room, which is right here, and killing the person so that Kima will let them leave. That is what actually progresses them towards their goal. So you have to kind of have it one of two ways. The way that Matt has it is this. He doesn't have any junctions. He doesn't describe anything as junctions. So this is just a confusing mess. It's a confusing mess when they run through it. I thought it was a confusing mess when I watched it. We talked about potential ways to make it more interesting, which I'll get to in a second. But all in all, just very, very confusing. And you either have to have it be confusing or utterly boring. Those are kind of the two options that we have. during stream, we talked about something. We talked about making all of these hallways fit a more broad theme of the Emberhold, of being progressive lava traps, where people upstairs are pulling levers and lava is being released to flow down the hallways to, interrupt intruders if the alarm is sounded. Or maybe even if the alarm isn't sounded, that this is just a regularly scheduled thing to disrupt intruders. Number one, that would create challenging paths in this place, which would be awesome. That would really spice this up. But there was a key part of that trap in that different levers would make lava flow down different hallways. Now, that's something we haven't really talked about with this map abstraction. How do you make it to where you can have maybe different patrols of guards that are in different areas at any given time? How do you make it to where you can have these changing, vibrant, moving dungeons and arenas that feel really alive and not super static? The thing I want to hit on here, if you have to do something to your map, kind of like the junctions, if you have to abstract your map, or you have to have multiple versions of your map on your end in order for your map to make sense to you, those multiple versions need to be clear to the party. The party at least needs to be clearly aware that there is multiple versions, even if they don't know what it means or they don't know how many. A really good example of this is Hunger Games Catching Fire, the clock arena, right? The clock arena frequently changes. There are 12 unique versions of the clock arena that if you are making that arena, you have to be aware of. And it is very clear and obvious to every one of the combatants that there are 12 versions, right? It's not maybe clear at the very beginning, but it becomes very clear over the course of the story. Another much more normal example is that there's some sort of chime or bell that indicates a change in guard shift that will modify which nodes are obstacles and will modify which nodes are normal, right? They don't have to know what the chime means. They don't have to know what the bell means. But if you need multiple versions, there needs to be some sort of tell that there are multiple versions. You have to work that into the fabric of the map. And that's it. Whoa. Congratulations. You have been educated. You all have your certificate in megaphone notation. But this notation is what helped me, I think, really understand my maps better and start to be able to break them down better. Something that I've talked a lot about is that even if you have maybe naturalistic maps, right? You have maps that you just put things where they make sense, right? You just logically go down the path of, okay, if this thing is here, then this thing should be here, and you just progress down that logic path. This map notation not only is still valuable, but I would say it's even more valuable. It shows you where you could maybe insert some treasure nodes. It shows you where you could insert some interesting nodes. And an interesting node doesn't have to be something that's built into the fabric of the layout. It can be foreshadowing. It can be the rumbling of a boulette off in the distance that will be a problem later in the dungeon. It can be a lot of things. And so even if you are building your maps what you consider to be, naturalistically, this can still show you where to insert things to make the pacing feel a little bit better and to make sure that your party doesn't tune out halfway through. So that's it.